Anyway, let's go on a couple other topics I had selected for today. Geez, I might have to pick another one, the way things are going here. Without commercial breaks, I tell you, I go through these outlines a lot quicker than I used to do on Oracle, and of course without calls. I don't know if I'm able to take calls. I thought I might be because I did update my Skype software, but haven't gotten any calls as yet. Looks like most people catch my show later in the archives anyway. There's been a lot of trouble listening to it live. But yeah, if anybody's listening and wants to call in, we can try and see if this works now. Anyway, I thought another topic that I'd cover is the Magna Carta. So many documents from history that profess to be great hallmarks of freedom, such as national constitutions and peace treaties, turn out upon close inspection to be nothing but Jewish supremacist created shams designed to enable them to gain power and control under the guise of bringing freedom for all. You know, the founding of this country, the Constitution, you start looking at it, folks, and it's deliberately filled with escape valves. It's filled with holes. It's not, the great infallible document that so many people make it out to be. Don't get me wrong, there's some good stuff in there, and we do well to follow it. But it's all rhetoric. It's window dressing. They left enough holes in the thing for them to find an out later on, and over the years they have. Of course, they don't even need to do that, because once you get people dumbed down, they don't pay attention to constitutions or any other legal restrictions anyway that are put on government. People don't even know what the hell the Constitution says, so it doesn't matter. But nevertheless, there are loopholes in it, and so it is with the Magna Carta, deliberately incorporated therein. Perhaps no better example could be cited than the so-called Holy Bible. People think that it's such a book of high moral standards. Why, look at the Ten Commandments. What a crock. The Ten Commandments, which says thou shalt not kill, and yet on every page of that damn book you've got that same God commanding murder on a grand scale, including sheep, cattle, horses, goats, young suckling infants, young maidens, show mercy to none, kill everything that breathes. Oh, that's not mass murder. That doesn't violate thou shalt not kill. You see, they always got their little safety valves. They always got their their blank check. They want you to focus just on the parts that seem good and wholesome, and that's what Bible believers do, isn't it? They'll just focus on those few parts that seem so nice, but yet justification is always included somewhere in their documents that they pawn off on us. There's always some loophole for them to get around, so they can continue with the very crimes that document is supposed to be condemning. It actually endorses them on a grand scale. The Bible speaks against sexual immorality, doesn't it, all the time? But you start reading closer and you realize this sexual immorality on every page of that fucking piece of literary crap. I'll do a whole show at some point down the line on sexual perversions in the Bible, endorsed by Yahweh. It's sickening. Yahweh endorses, I'll do another show examining the Ten Commandments. We'll look at some examples where Yahweh endorses abortion, for God's sakes. I've already talked on Oracle before about Yahweh endorsing and actually commanding human sacrifice. Go back in the archives, listen to that one. Anyway, so, we've seen this before, as I said, with the U.S. Constitution. The resolution of the National Assembly in the wake of the French Revolution, and the emancipation document drafted up in wake of the March Revolution in Russia. All rhetoric. These documents are designed to fool the masses into thinking that things are changing now, things are getting better. And yet, these little loopholes are put in there for them to continue with their crimes on a grander scale. So is this the same with the Magna Carta? Was this yet another example of Jewish supremacist finagling? Well, let's have a look, shall we? Let's first take a look at an overview of the document here. The Magna Carta, or the Great Charter of the Liberties of England, was originally issued in Latin in the year 1215 and was later reissued in the same century in modified versions. The later versions excluded the most direct challenges to the monarch's authority that had been present in the 1215 charter. So, they modified it and watered it down as they went along. This was done deliberately. The first edition, it had to look good to suck the masses in. But then as they revised it, its true original intended purpose started to emerge. The charter first passed into law in 1225. The 1297 version, with the long title originally in Latin, the Great Charter of the Liberties of England and of the Liberties of the Forest, still remains on the statute books of England and Wales to this day. The 1215 charter required King John of England to proclaim certain liberties and to accept that his will was not arbitrary, which meant, for example, that no free man, in the sense of non-serf, could be punished except through the law of the land, a right which is still in existence today. The Magna Carta was the first document forced onto a king of England by a group of his subjects, the feudal barons, in an attempt to limit his powers by law and protect their privileges. It was preceded and directly influenced by the Charter of Liberties in the year 1100, in which King Henry I had specified particular areas wherein his powers would be limited. Anyway, Lord Denning described the Magna Carta as, quote, the greatest constitutional document of all times, the foundation of the freedom of the individual against the arbitrary authority of the despot. So once again, it all looked good on the surface, nice rhetoric, something everybody, could embrace, but was that really what was going on here? In a 2005 speech, Lord Wolfe described the Magna Carta as, quote, first of a series of instruments that now are recognized as having a special constitutional status, the others being the Habeas Corpus Act, 1679, the Petition of Right, 1628, the Bill of Rights, 1689, and the Act of Settlement, 1701. Notice these documents just referred to began emerging at a time when Jews were being allowed back into England. Isn't that interesting? The Magna Carta, anyway, was important in the colonization of American colonies, where England's legal system was used as a model for many of the colonies, while they were developing their own legal systems and later influenced the U.S. Constitution. But there's something unique about this document that presents a familiar hidden hand that worked behind the scenes in its formulation, pushing a hidden agenda. And let's not forget, at the time that Magna Carta first emerged, 1215, Jews were still in England. This is before they were ousted later in 1290. So let's look at its hidden agenda here. For most historians and history books, the story behind the Magna Carta ends there. in the brief overview we just looked at. It was simply created by barons who wanted their rights, ensured against a power-hungry dictatorial monarch. So thus they rebelled against the king, King John, and forced him to comply with their demands. That's how you're supposed to perceive it. That's how most people perceive it. That's the way it's portrayed in the history books. But as always, there's more to it than that. Specifically, clauses 10 and 11 are most interesting. They related in a favorable way to money lending in England, particularly Jewish money lending. Now, why and how do you suppose that wound up in a document supposedly established solely by and for the English barons? Understand that at this time in England, Jews were particularly involved in money lending because Christian teachings forbidding usury did not apply to them. Can you imagine? Christians were forbidden to engage in usury, but Jews were allowed by law to do so. Who do you think set a law like that up? And they justified it by saying, oh, well, it's such a bad practice, we Christians shouldn't be doing it, but they allowed Jews to? You don't think Jews were behind this, ladies and gentlemen? Jewish supremacist swine balls? Of course they were. This is jaw-dropping. According to both secular and church law, Christians, again, were forbidden to engage in usury, but Jews were allowed to do so simply because they weren't Christians. Again, what does this sound like? Anyway, folks, short break, right back. Anyway, Clause 10 of the Magna Carta stated that children would not pay interest on a debt that they had inherited while they were underage. And Clause 11 stated that the widow and children should be provided for before paying an inherited debt. This all sounds fine and dandy, but the Charter concluded this section with these words, quote, debts owing to other than Jews shall be dealt with likewise. Now, why did this document have to say that? If you ask me, simply by mentioning the word Jews, the implication is that Jews were to be allowed to continue to engage in high rates of usurious money lending in England. That's it, plain and simple. But it appeared that the efforts of limiting the king's power through the Magna Carta were designed to fail, as the king was not abiding by much of it anyway. But then a lucky twist of fate just happened to occur. In the following year, 1216, King John died suddenly, allegedly from dysentery, a swelling of the intestines. Now with his death, things changed. Sounds like a poisoning to me. Anyway, this would only make sense since John wasn't a big fan of the Jews in England. Suddenly he dies. How many times have we seen this in history? I mean, back to ancient Rome, Babylon, Assyria. Anyway, 2 years earlier, in 1210, just for an example, he had Jews across England imprisoned for not paying a huge tax that he levied on them. So they simply ousted him. Obviously, the tactics of the Jewish supremacists were entirely ineffective in England at this time, for within several decades, in the year 1290 to be exact, they got expelled from the country for the next 350 years or so. So, you know, they were trying to change laws that favored their interests and did for a time, but ultimately it all backfired. Their whole plan fell apart, and they were ousted. But notice how relentless they are, guys. All during that time, they were constantly trying to get their foot back in the door, engaging in all kinds of shenanigans, and finally, by the 17th century, by staging uprisings and fires across England and, the British Revolution, the British Civil War. The next thing you know, there they are, got their foot back in the door. There was even a plague unleashed at the time across England. Anyway, King John had bucked horns with Pope Innocent III on several issues, one being his anti-Semitism. In fact, with rulers like King John in mind, Innocent issued the Constitution for the Jews in 1199, which stated in part, although in many ways the disbelief of the Jews must be reproved, since nevertheless through them our own faith is truly proved, they must not be oppressed grievously by the faithful. So he has to get that in there, we got to straighten them out, we got a religion, whatever. We got to convert them to one form of Judaism instead of another. It's all Christianity is, ladies and gentlemen. But nevertheless, it's all rhetoric, to make it look like, I'm not really their friend, when he in fact was a Jew himself. But they must not be oppressed grievously by the faithful, he says. Just as, therefore, there ought not to be license for the Jews to presume to go beyond what is permitted them by law in their synagogues, he says, so in those which have been conceded to them, they ought to suffer no prejudice. We, out of the meekness proper to Christian piety, and keeping in the footprints of our predecessors of happy memory, the Roman pontiffs Calixtus, Eugene, Alexander, Clement, and Celestine, admit their petition, and we grant them the buckler of our protection. Oh, for somebody that is supposedly against, against Jews and their disbelief. Oh, he's awfully concerned about protecting them, isn't he? The document goes on, 2, no Christian ought to presume, apart from the judicial sentence of the territorial power, wickedly to injure their persons, or with violence to take away their property, or to change the good customs which they have had until now in whatever region they inhabit. The good customs, their usurious customs. Anyway, he continues, besides, in the celebration of their own festivals, no one ought to disturb them in any way with clubs or stones, nor ought anyone try to require from them or to extort from them services they do not owe. But it's okay for them to extort. Remember, they were allowed to practice usury, but Christians weren't. Except for those, he says, that they have been accustomed from times past to perform. In addition to these, he says, we decree, blocking the wickedness and avarice of civil men, that no one ought to dare to mutilate or diminish a Jewish cemetery, nor in order to get money, to exhume bodies once they have been buried. So, again, this whole thing was designed solely to protect Jews and Jewish interests. Once again, a Jewish pope. Innocent didn't remain a Jewish supremacist butt-kisser for long, though, probably due to pressure from his parishioners. Sorry about that, folks. Knocked my mic over there. For example, in the Fourth Lateran Council, convened on April 19th, 1213, again, due to tremendous outside pressure being put on him, Innocent mandated that Jews wear special identifying markings on their clothing. This council also legislated against subordination of Christians to Jews. He had to do this for window dressing purposes. Canon 69 forbade, quote, that Jews be given preferment in public office, since offices then wait a minute. Yes, since this offers them the pretext to vent their wrath against the Christians. In other words, we're not going to allow Jews in public office, not because they're corrupt, but because there'll be resentments by Christians and they'll want to, rise up against them. So it's actually saying that to protect Jews, we're not going to allow them in office. You see how he words it? Very crafty. Jews have been thrown out of so many countries because, and banned from holding public office or working in any financial institution like in, Byzantium, for example. Because they were criminals, they were banned. But the Pope here is banning them, but not for that reason. Only because he's afraid Christians are going to be jealous or whatever and rise up against them. So he's actually doing this for their protection, you see. And why? Because, again, he's a Jew. Anyway, Jewish influence can always be detected behind the scenes, of course, and there's even been some times where they had to oppress some low-level Jews, again, for window dressing purposes. The Protocols talks about that. Some of our own have had to suffer on occasion, and this is regrettable, but, it's been for a worthy cause, and it's paid off. Anyway. But there you go, guys. The Magna Carta, just like our own Constitution, had some loopholes. The Magna Carta was even more blatantly influenced, obviously influenced by our little Jewish supremacist friends, though, to actually include statements about Jews and special concessions for usury. Unbelievable. They got their hand and have always had their hand in every freaking pie. All right, that concludes that. Let's go on to another topic.